Good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many of you joining us. I invite you to say hi in the chat and let us know that you're here. We welcome you all and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Stephanie Paul, and I am the Executive Director of MyFace, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our program today. This web education program is designed for families of children with craniofacial differences, caregivers, and healthcare providers. I would like to thank the Milbank Foundation and the Louis J. and June E. K. Foundation for funding this important program and acknowledge their appreciation for the critical need to provide educational programs like this one for families of children impacted by a craniofacial difference. MyFace has a long history of providing access to comprehensive medical and dental care, along with education and direct patient services, paving the way for better patient outcomes. At the heart of our approach are three pillars of support. First, through our grant funding to top-level organizations across the nation, we deliver quality, comprehensive craniofacial care to ensure that patients receive surgical, dental, psychosocial, speech, nutritional, and other aspects of care in a coordinated fashion. Second, through our range of direct services, MyFace aims to meet the day-to-day needs of the craniofacial community by offering support groups for affected children and adults and parents, distribution of newborn care kits specially designed for babies born with a craniofacial difference, and housing for families traveling to New York City for treatments. Finally, we strive to educate patients, families, and healthcare providers through programs like this Transforming Lives webinar series and raise public awareness about craniofacial differences through our Wonder Project school assemblies and our monthly podcast, My Face, My Story, Voices from the Craniofacial Community, where individuals can share their stories, be seen, and be heard. MyFace is here to bring together the craniofacial community and help transform the lives of children and adults living with facial differences. We believe everyone deserves a chance to thrive and live the best life possible. And now on to our program. We have two presenters today. Our first presenter is Dr. Meredith Albert, a licensed clinical psychologist with the Cleft Craniofacial team located at Shriners Children's Chicago in Chicago, Illinois, and an assistant clinical professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Our second presenter is Dr. Kenise E. Crerand, a principal investigator in the Center of Biobehavioral Health, the Abigail Wexner Research Institute at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and an assistant professor in the departments of pediatrics and plastic surgery at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. We will also hear from two patient speakers, Haley Dorr and Jackson Doan. After the presentation, we will open the program for questions from participants. As you think of questions for our speakers, please enter those questions into the chat on your screen during the program. And now it is my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Dr. Albert and Dr. Crerand.
Good evening, everybody. How are you doing? We're so happy to see people from all over the world joining us tonight. My name's Meredith Albert.
And hi, I'm Kenise Crerand. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, go ahead.
Neither of us have any disclosures.
Took the words out of my mouth. Yeah. So our objectives for this evening are to identify stressors and describe strategies for effective stress management, to provide strategies to help navigate the social world of adolescence, and to empower adolescents to set goals, plans for the future, and increase their independence and self-efficacy both in and out of school. So defining adolescence is one of the trickiest things that I could think of in my work, because really the variations in the definition of adolescence are huge and have changed over time, over many, many years. So at the basis, the adolescence is a time of independence and identity seeking. G. Stanley Hall, who was an early psychologist, defined adolescence of a time and storm and stress that occurs between the ages of 14 and 24 years. And he defined that in the year 1904, so over 100 years ago. Erik Erikson, another famous psychologist, defined adolescence as a period of moratorium in which a person is free from responsibility, which I'm not going to tell my 14-year-old that at home because he might take that very literally, but it is a time when we seek independence and identity between the ages of 12 and 18 years. And more currently, our definition from the World Health Organization is any person between the ages of 10 and 19 years. So adolescence has varied a little bit over time, but the basis remains the same, that it's a hard period to identify, and it's one of our trickiest periods of development.
So, as many of you know, as parents and having been through adolescence yourselves, you may remember this is a time period that's filled with transitions. And oftentimes those transitions can lead to some different types of stressors and challenges. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of here that I think are most salient for this developmental stage. So during adolescence, we know that young people are going through a rapid period of physical development, going through puberty, growing in terms of both height as well as weight. And many of those physical appearance challenges can lead to a preoccupation with how they look, as well as some increased self-consciousness. And again, that's normal across the board. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the specific issues that may come up for young people with craniofacial differences. But again, knowing that self-consciousness and that focus on appearance is pretty typical. Similarly, we know that there are cognitive transitions or milestones that are attained during this particular time in development, including an increase in abstract thinking, forming your own ideas. And this means that sometimes young people may begin to question or develop different views from their parents. That could be around politics, religion, rules. So there's more questioning, sometimes opposition to what had been the status quo in the family, or just even in terms of some of their worldviews. So again, those can lead to some stressors or challenges potentially. And then I think probably one of the biggest transitions that we see during adolescence is in the realm of social development, meaning that peers really start to take on increased emphasis, that desire to fit in and to form a group of friends and peers outside of your family of origin. As well as developing interests in romantic relationships or dating. And again, while those are very normal and expected transitions, we can see some stressors or challenges, particularly related to exposures to risky behaviors. So for example, wanting to fit in with peers that may be experimenting with alcohol or vaping, as well as social media use and bullying, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So as Meredith alluded to, identity development is really one of the core tasks of adolescence. Young people are grappling with the question of, who am I? How am I similar or different from peers? What do I want to do with my life? What do I want to do with my, do I want a career? Do I want a family of my own? And coupled with that is this increased sense of what we call the imaginary audience, where they kind of feel like they're on display all the time, or that other people are taking special notice of them. And that's not to say that that's in an indicator of psychopathology. It's just more that there's this intense sense that of themselves and who they are and what other people might be thinking about them. So again, that all of these questions that they're grappling with can be a source of stress for young people during this stage of development. So we also know that children and teens with craniofacial differences may feel different from their peers, owing to some of the medical experiences that they've had, undergoing multiple staged surgical procedures, having an appearance that may be different from others, having scars or facial asymmetries. We know that some craniofacial conditions can affect speech, and other features of their bodies. So that could impact how they're perceiving themselves and potentially how they're making comparisons to how they fit in with their peers. So during this stage of development, a couple of things can be helpful. For one is to normalize and validate the concerns that a young person is having about either feeling different or having worries about fitting in with their peers. And sometimes it can even go a long way just to normalize that this isn't something that they're struggling with on their own, but that their peers are also experiencing common struggles during this stage of adolescence. But it's also important to recognize some of the real differences that they may be encountering, either related to their speech or their appearance or just their medical care needs. So saying, I get that, I see that that's stressful and that is different, and we can talk about it and work on a way to figure it out together. So other ways of supporting your teen during this time, I think as owing to their, again, abilities to think abstractly and to take different perspectives about different issues, thinking about different sides of topics, it can be useful to have them give some consideration to any hidden benefits or positives that may have come out of their experiences with their craniofacial condition or its treatment. So, for example, thinking about some of the gifts or hidden blessings that may have come out, whether it's an increased sense of empathy for other people that may have health issues or have gone through surgery or other stressors, feeling a sense of resilience and being able to cope with stressors that life throws their way. And then also just reflecting on the fact that even though they may have had hard times as a young person, that may be just setting themselves up for success in the future. It's also important to recognize that there may be times when young people may not want to talk about their differences. Again, there's that desire to fit in and to not seem different from their peers. And at other times, they may want to discuss it more directly. And this can shift over time. So as parents or caregivers, just being aware of this fluidity and this shifting that can happen in terms of how they're thinking about their craniofacial condition and what it means to them and their own identity. As we'll talk about tonight, there's some strategies to keep the lines of communication open, and then also thinking about ways to educate the young person about their craniofacial condition, its medical care, and then looking for ways to involve them in their medical and surgical care. Opportunities for having choice and control, especially now that they're able to participate more actively.
So to piggyback off what Kenise was talking about, one of the things that is important is to keep those lines of communication open, because more than several times a week in clinic, when we're working with caregivers, we will hear that question of, why won't my teenager talk to me? And again, sometimes that's developmentally appropriate. Teens are figuring out who they are. They're figuring out their social world. They're figuring out how to communicate with parents and caregivers and teachers and everyone around them. So in thinking about what we hear commonly about why people have arguments with and caregivers have arguments with their children, oftentimes I put car and transportation first on the slide, but I think phone and social media might actually outweigh that one as most important, because in this day and age, cell phones and social media are a lifeline for many teenagers. We're not going to touch upon issues that happened with COVID, but for many of our teens, they entered adolescence during a period of COVID. And so having those social media and that electronic communication was one way to stay connected with peers. So that's often a source of conflict about with parents and children. Other issues that can come up is things like independence with the car and transportation, school, academic performance, how we're doing with sports or outside activities, certainly friends, clothing, the things that we've just touched upon that help with that identity development piece, because teenagers are figuring out who they are and how they express themselves are through these mediums. As we also just touched upon, the medical and surgical decision-making is certainly an area that can come up under conflict between parents and adolescent children. And we never, ever want to force a child to have a surgical, to make a surgical decision until they're ready. And so those are things that are really important to make sure there's good communication between parent and caregivers. Other things like nutrition, not eating too much junk food, bedtime, and just really taking care of oneself. It is really important to be mindful of the age of your adolescent or your teenager in communication, because a child who is 13 or 14 is at a very different developmental stage, both cognitively, socially, and many other ways, than an adolescent who's 18 or 19 years of age. At the basis, we want to make sure that a nurturing environment is provided, that we are respecting an adolescent's independence, and we're helping them take responsibility for the decisions that they make. So there's lots of strategies to help improve parent and child communication. At the heart of things, the most important is having space and respect. If your child says, I don't want to talk about something right now, giving them the space to do that is extremely important, because generally if you force a conversation, it's going to backfire and be a very unproductive situation for everybody. And there's also a difference between listening and hearing, as the audiologists that I work with will point out to you very clearly. And so that's important to keep in mind too, that our hearing and what we're actually listening to and what's being said is important to recognize. There's different strategies that families can use, like scheduling a talk time, maybe setting a timer for 10 minutes of we're going to address this specific topic, and make it very direct and very purposeful in what is being addressed so that it's productive and useful. Some teens have a really hard time verbalizing their feelings or what they're thinking about. So using things like back and forth notebooks, and in this day and age, we have our cell phones, and even texting, because sometimes that face-to-face discussion puts a lot more pressure on the situation. And if you can take some of that pressure off, that helps facilitate communication. It's also extremely important for, and really children and adolescents of any age, to have really clearly outlined rules and consequences. It might be that your child does break a rule, and that happens. That happens for most children and most adolescents. But making sure that the crime and the punishment are reasonable with each other, and not saying, wow, you broke curfew, you're not going out for the next 6 months, because that might be a little more punitive than it needs to be. It's also important to think about if your child is not feeling comfortable talking to you, maybe they have another trusted adult that they feel more comfortable talking about, maybe an older sibling, or maybe an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent that you know could also be an appropriate person to help them navigate some tricky situations. And so here's just an example of a rules list. And I have rules lists that I've used that cover probably 15 pages of different topics. So these are just different kinds of examples of what you can work on at home to help with your teenager. A rule around phone usage. It might be 2 hours per day. It might be 6 hours per day. If the rules are broken, it might be loss of phone privileges for a day, not necessarily for a month, but maybe appropriate for what the rule that was broken. If you're letting your 16 or 17 or 18-year-old use your car, and you have an expectation that the gas should be at half a tank at all times, and that rule is broken, then maybe losing the car for a day. And then coming up with different expectations for things like chores, which the list could go on and on and on, and different consequences for when chores are not being fulfilled, or things like grades. And everything needs to be specific to a family. Different families have different expectations, and that should be respected and discussed amongst your own specific family. Regardless of what the rule is, it should be a clear and achievable, and what I already mentioned, have appropriate consequences.
So I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes talking a bit about the social world of adolescence. We know that peers, again, play such a central role in their lives, and friendships are important to development, right? They really provide a source of validation and support, And they're also kind of an opportunity to learn about how to have a healthy relationship as they make that transition into adulthood and thinking about starting their own families, having partnerships, etc. So during this stage of adolescence, we see the social circle expand to include friends, dates, romantic interests, or boyfriends, girlfriends, teammates, club members, adult mentors, and coaches. And a lot of teens may have their first jobs, so they may actually have a boss or work colleagues for the first time. So you can see that social world really starting to expand. Sorry about that. Slide is glitching for a minute. There we go. So one question that often comes up for many parents, especially if they have a teenager in their house that seems to be a bit on the shy side, is whether quality or quantity of friends matters. And really what the research tells us is that quality seems to be more important than quantity. So even having one good friend who is supportive and trustworthy can really protect teens from mental health risks, including depression. So you don't need to have 50 friends in order to be meeting your social milestones during adolescence. And as Meredith alluded to, social media is increasingly part of socialization and social development for teens. Between group chats and texts, WhatsApp, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, there's probably a new platform that just came up while we're even talking. It seems like it's difficult to keep pace with all of the advances that are going on. We also know that a lot of youth will communicate with each other while they're gaming online. So really, we do live in a social world, and it has both pros and cons, as we'll talk about here. So from an advantage standpoint, we know that social media platforms provide opportunities for connection and community building. Think about what we're doing here tonight, right? We're able to communicate and share information and hopefully get some support and resources out to everyone because of the internet. But we also know that there can be some real risks. And sometimes, unfortunately, people can feel less inhibited and more likely to share mean comments because of the anonymity or just distance that the online community can provide. So it's important to be thinking about that. The other piece that comes into play here too is that we don't want kids just to have friends online. We also want them to develop relationships IRL, right? In real life, as they say. So that's important too. And to be thinking about what the consequences are of your social media environment or social media usage and environments are. So for example, posting pictures, if you're on Instagram, thinking about the long-term consequences of posting a picture, you have to give that some thought. And adolescents, again, may not be able to appreciate those long-term consequences, again, because their brains really aren't going to be fully developed until they're in their mid-20s to really have that appreciation. So thinking about whether they want to put something up there and the fact that even if you take it down, it may not be gone for good. So we typically encourage families to monitor their child social media activities and accounts. So that could include being friended and kind of keeping tabs that way. Sometimes there are programs or other systems that families work out just for monitoring of their child's social media activities. So in terms of strategies to support social development for adolescents, it's important, I think, to be thinking about the types of support that may be needed during this stage. In my experience as a clinician, youth often seem to benefit when they have support from other peers with craniofacial conditions, as well as peers in their daily lives. It's important to remember that even though conditions like cleft lip and palate are fairly common in terms of their prevalence rates, a youth may be the only person in their school or within their community that has that condition. So online connections and support groups, those kinds of issues resources can be super helpful. And it's also very important to think about ways of connecting them to peers in their daily lives. So what can you do if you think that your teen isn't socializing enough, or you're concerned that they're seeming more isolated or not developing friendships. I think there can be some opportunities during adolescence that also dovetail with other transitions that are going on, thinking about activities that might support future goals academically or for their career. So getting involved in volunteer activities. Sometimes working with younger children can be an opportunity to develop kind of mentorship or leadership skills and getting to know other people that are serving in those roles. That's a way of expanding your network. Looking for church or faith-based groups can be an opportunity to develop some other relationships outside of the family. And then again, any involvement in sports teams, camps, or other types of extracurricular activities. I did want to take a moment, since we're talking about kind of social medias, to think about cyberbullying, which unfortunately can be a real stressor for many young people today. And that's really defined as bullying that occurs over digital devices. That could be phones, tablets, computers, while they're playing an online game. And it can involve social media posts, email, text messages, instant messages, direct messages, all of those kinds of things, or even involvement in chat rooms. And any cyberbullying specifically is defined as sending or posting or sharing negative or mean content about other people that's intended to embarrass or humiliate other people. Sorry about that. Got a little delay there. So if it is occurring, it's important to document what platform it's happening. Is that platform affiliated with school? Because the affiliation has some implications for how you might be able to stop it or to report it. So for example, a school-based platform or a school-based activity, it would be important to contact the school administration or the coach, friends and peers. It can be helpful to reach out to the parents of the bully. If you're concerned about the activities online, they might not be aware. And then you can also contact platform administration to remove any unwanted content, block users, or delete accounts. And I've included a resource here for cyberbullying that you're free to check out. And then if those measures don't work out, or there are concerns about violence or threats, aggression, blackmail, or stalking, then it's important to get law enforcement involved. So along those lines, we know that while teasing can occur online, it can also occur in real life. And unfortunately, I know both from research as well as clinical experiences that young people with craniofacial conditions are at increased risk for being singled out by their peers due to appearance, speech, or their learning differences in some instances. Middle school is often the time of greatest risk, but we know that sometimes bullying can continue into high school, although we often see that it changes a bit and that it may look more like social exclusion, even if overt bullying has declined. So that might mean that you're excluded from the group chat or you're not invited to the pool party. And that can be just as painful as people saying something mean directly to your face. And we know that bullying and social exclusion can have negative impacts on adult adjustment. Those types of scars can stay with people in terms of developing anxiety, depression, body image dissatisfaction, or even just low self-esteem. So what can we do to handle teasing and bullying? I think it's important to check in regularly with your young person about what's happening and to validate their feelings that it's not their fault and to offer support. Again, it can be useful to think about ways of addressing the concerns with the adults in the environment where the bullying is happening. So that could be at school, or it could be at the bus or on a sports team. For young people that have individualized education plans or IEPs, you can actually request that the IEP be modified to include protections against bullying, or to provide supports to help your child develop better social skills or strategies to respond to any types of unwanted attention. And I think particularly for teens, it's important to have a collaborative approach, because oftentimes teens are reluctant to talk to their parents when this is happening because they don't want mom and dad going to school. They don't want to be perceived as having told on a friend. So it might be important as a starting place just to explore options about how to handle it together, to consider their perspectives and choices, and to think about some contingencies. So if we start with one approach that the team has come up with and that doesn't work, what is the next step? Another strategy for handling teasing and bullying, especially if kids are reluctant to report it to you, would be to just remember to fall back on those open-ended questions. Instead of saying, did you have a good day today? Tell me about your day. What was a high point or a low point? Look for signs such as damaged or missing property or clothing, avoidance of going to school or riding the bus or particular activities, or kids telling stories about something that, evidence that may have happened, like having missing property, and the story doesn't quite match up with your observations. So it's important just to kind of be mindful and to observe, and then to point that out if you're noticing anything that doesn't seem to connect. And importantly, if you're noticing changes in your child's mood, behavior, or have concerns that they may be thinking about suicide or harming another child, consultation with a mental health professional is recommended. I'm also going to touch a bit on social transitions and facial differences. Again, I think this is something that comes up owing to that expanding social circle that young people have with new schools and activities and jobs. That's going to involve meeting new people who may be unfamiliar with the young person and their craniofacial differences. And we know that having a facial difference can sometimes lead to social challenges. For example, they may be stared at, they may get questions from other people. Sometimes people are more avoidant and may lack eye contact, or they just may have this general sense of feeling like they're not able to blend in with the crowd, or they lose their anonymity. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the why that happens, and that it's not always an indicator of cruelty. Humans are hardwired on a brain level to notice differences. We're also naturally drawn to faces, particularly the eyes and the mouth, since these play such a role in communication. And sometimes it can be helpful for the young person to learn a little bit more about that, and to think about noticing or staring as a neutral brain response rather than an indication of cruelty. Again, during this stage, owing to some of those expanded cognitive abilities that are occurring, adolescents can benefit from perspective taking, and even they might even start to examine why other people might stare or look away when they notice a person with any type of difference. So kind of broaden the scope and to think about it more about other issues. So for example, somebody in a wheelchair has an amputation, a hearing aid, or a scar. And have they ever noticed a person with a difference and wondered about what caused it or how it affects them? How did they react in that situation? And how would they change their response or reaction? A couple of strategies can be helpful to sort of smooth out some of these social interactions. I label this making the first move. So just a couple of pointers here, including having confident body language. So standing up straight, making eye contact, and smiling. Especially when they're first meeting new people, taking the first move and introducing yourself, thinking about small talk and conversation starters. So, and some of these can be practiced even in lower kind of socially risky situations. So if a youth is afraid to maybe ask a peer about some of these kinds of things, they might be able to practice asking the cashier in the grocery store, someone else that maybe they don't know as well or won't encounter again, just to begin to practice some of those social skills. And then teaching them about asking open-ended questions, since that's a way of facilitating conversation and getting to know the other person. Also looking for commonalities. So when they're talking with another person, kind of thinking about, oh gosh, what might we have in common and how can we keep the conversation going about that topic? So I put Taylor Swift in here. I have a preteen at home who's very interested in her, so we talk about that a lot. But bringing up differences in a casual way is a final kind of strategy that may also be helpful. So for example, rather than waiting for someone to ask a question, is there a way for you to kind of share information about yourself in a more casual way? So if somebody asks you how your day was, you could offer that you had just been to a doctor's appointment. Oh yeah, I have to go every year for a checkup related to my cleft lip and palate. No more surgery for me right now, which is awesome. Let's figure out some fun things to do this summer. And I think by bringing it up in that way, it demonstrates to the other person that you're comfortable talking about it. So then if they do have a question, maybe you can have it in a way that feels more comfortable and casual for everyone involved. I did want to highlight too another strategy that we'll call explain, reassure, distract, deflect. And this is a way of kind of coming up with a prepared response to kind of head off any of those questions that may come up about appearance or speech differences. And essentially, we encourage young people to have a brief explanation. So, oh, I was born with a cleft lip and palate. I had a split in my lip and the roof of my mouth. So something that's very straightforward, neutral, and factual. And then to offer some reassurance. It's okay. It's not a big deal. I had some surgery when I was a baby. Sometimes it affects how I talk and how well the others can understand me. Let me know if you need me to repeat something. Again, oftentimes people ask because they're curious or they have a sense of concern. And so by providing some reassurance, that sort of helps facilitate answering the question and kind of helping the other person move on. And then we usually encourage the distract or deflect piece of the conversation, which involves steering the conversation in another direction. So preferably something that you might have in common. Hey, what was our science homework assignment for tonight? Do you want to study together for the exam? All right, I'll kick it back over to Meredith now.
A lot of great information, and I'm going to move a little bit quickly through concerns with mental health just to make sure that we have time for some of our other presenters and questions and answers. So mental health among adolescents in particular is something that invades our media and the news stories right now, and rightfully so, because it's become a really, really big area of concern and one that needs a lot of medical attention and to be addressed by professionals. So while there's a ginormous list of different mental health concerns that can come about, a lot of the concerns that we see in our clinical practice fall under the umbrella of depression and the umbrella of anxiety and ADHD and adjustment. And so sometimes it's not a pure diagnosis of depression or anxiety that we run into, but maybe entering a new situation, maybe entering high school, maybe something around the surgical decision making. And so something that we would fall under the period of adjustment and needs to be addressed with support. Just a statistic that I found that's important to share: 1 out of 6 youth in the US between the ages of 6 and 17 years will experience a mental health disorder each year. So a common question that we see in clinical practice is, what is normal teenage stuff? Because as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, using the word teenager or using the word adolescence, there's really nothing normal about it. It's so much variation and so many differences for so many different people, versus what is more psychopathology and what we would fall under kind of a diagnosable mental health disorder. So there's lots of different things that parents and professionals and teens can do to support adolescents as they're moving through this stage of life. So it's really important to monitor behavior and symptoms. And you'll see a list of different areas in just a minute. We want to examine day-to-day functioning. How is my child doing? Are they just having a rough day today? Or have they had a really rough month and maybe that sadness or the funk that your child seems to be in doesn't seem to be going away, versus having just a 1 or 2 days where they seem off? What has changed? Is it just our interest in school has changed? Is just our sleep patterns have changed? Has our appetite changed? Wanting to be with friends or interest in activities. So it's important to look at the what as well. We can ask questions like, how successful is the adolescent doing in school? Is your child someone who has been getting all A's and B's and then all of a sudden they're getting D's and F's? What do peer relationships look like? I think it's great to think about the quantity versus quality. Maybe your child had 3 really, really solid friendships and they don't want to be with anybody right now. Or maybe they're a child that we would describe as someone like a social butterfly and they're out and about with people all the time. And they, again, have very little interest in being with their peers. And also looking at questions of what kinds of activities does the teen participate both in and out of school, and have there been changes over time in those interests? So while this is not a all-inclusive list, this is a pretty comprehensive list of things to examine and for parents and children to self-monitor as well. I think that's really important that as adolescents are growing, we want to trust and respect what they're saying and their opinions and how they're feeling. And so these are things that are really important for self-monitoring as well. So is there an excessive worry or fear taking place? And again, not just having fear about a test or finals coming up, but is there excessive fear or worry that's persistent and it doesn't go away? The same thing with feeling excessively sad or having a low mood. It might just be, well, we lost our volleyball game, or I didn't do as well on the test, or there's some drama going on with my girlfriends and it's making me feel down in the dumps. And is that persistent or is that short-lived? If your child's having confused thinking or problems concentrating and learning, oftentimes we can talk about ADHD as a problem with attention, but we also want to look at, is a child feeling extremely worried or anxious or feeling extremely sad, because that also can affect our ability to concentrate. Have there been extreme mood changes, so that one day we're on top of the world and the next day we're at the bottom of the valley? And is that highs and lows in those mountains persistent and going up and down pretty frequently? Are there prolonged or strong feelings of irritability and anger? For some teens, if they're feeling what we would call depression, they're not necessarily like adults going to put their head under the covers and not get out of bed for a week. There might be increased irritability and a lot of anger and short temper. Is there a lot of avoidance of things like social activities, going to work, responsibilities, avoiding friends? Is there difficulty understanding or relating to other people? And again, keeping in mind, these are all things that have changed over time, and you want to monitor these changes to see what's going on. There have been extreme changes in sleep habits, lack of energy. It might just be a really busy finals week. I know many teens just finished up finals for school, and so sleep might not be so great, but does it go back to normal? Or is your child sleeping excessively and not able to get out of bed? Teens, what we tend to find, will have short nights of sleep on the weekdays, and then we'll have rebound periods on the weekends. Have there been changes in those kinds of patterns? Same thing with appetite. Has there been a significant increase in hunger or significant lack of appetite? Multiple physical ailments are important because sometimes our emotions will present as more somatic kinds of symptoms. So something like headaches, stomach aches, just vague aches and pains are important to monitor. And an ability to carry out daily activities or handle daily problems. Stress is normal. We all experience stress. Children experience stress, adolescents experience stress. And has there been changes in one's ability to manage those things? So there's lots of different strategies to help support a positive mood and help reduce anxiety. And so again, going back to that question of how much is the mood or problems with anxiety affecting day-to-day life? We can all have worries, but if you're able to complete the tasks and you're able to be social, then it might be less of a concern when your teen is telling you, oh, I'm actually doing okay, even though you know they're experiencing stress and they're able to carry out their day-to-day responsibilities for school and work and friendship groups and things like that. But there's also a lot of times where we need extra support. And sometimes that support can come from parents. But I think it's really important that parents or caregivers be the parent and not be the professional. And so you shouldn't be the one treating and Kenise and I could tell ourselves this all the time because we both have kids, that we need to be parents and not psychologists when it comes to our own children. So that's the figuring out the when and the why. And there's no specific reason when I would say, oh, seek help, but it can't hurt to pursue a second opinion. And so if you feel like, wow, my child just seems to really be struggling, rather than sitting there and having those kinds of questions or trying to figure out what's going on, you can consult pediatricians, you can consult a school-based counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, anyone that falls under that umbrella to at least help you get started to see if your child would benefit from additional services. There's a lot of different great resources. One that we like to use because I treat patients from all around the country, and I don't always know resources in different states out west or whatnot. And so we can go on a website that families can use called Psychology Today, and you can go find a therapist. And it's great because you can put in information like your insurance, what you think the concerns are. Are the concerns attention? Are the concerns mood or anxiety, what your insurance is, and come up with a list of providers in your area. And that could be a good starting point. You could also talk with your pediatrician. You can seek out from insurance companies for referrals and talking with school, because sometimes they'll have a list of providers as well. There's lots of great apps on the phone or the iPads or the tablets or whatever that can be used to help support kids. And there's lots of different relaxation strategies and grounding exercises. I'll go over a couple here in just a minute. And one thing I want to point out, we talk a lot about deep breathing and as a relaxation strategy. And I think for children and adolescents who have craniofacial differences, oftentimes there's airway management issues. And so we want to be really mindful of what deep breathing looks like on some of those apps or in some of the instruction that you can get from different videos or even from providers, that can be compromised a little bit for someone who has a craniofacial difference if there's airway management issues. And so we just want to be mindful when we're making those recommendations. And as I said earlier, if there's ever a concern or a question, rather than sitting there and playing the let's see, wait and see game, seek out a second opinion. If at any point ever you feel like, or your child is suggesting to you that they are not feeling safe, it is most important to call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or we now have the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And making sure your team knows that that's an available resource is really, really important. So a couple different apps out there, and these will be under the resources as well. Headspace, we see the commercials for Headspace and Calm all over the place, and those are great apps and have lots of different options that you can easily download. It's also nice because people can, and teenagers don't need permission to use these things. They can just go access it if they know that they're having a rough day and they need to have some time and space and just a way to change their mindset. These are great things that people can do on their own. I really like the 3 good things. It's actually kind of a journal, and you seek out, okay, what are 3 good things that happened today? Even if the rest of the day feels terrible and crummy, it's a good one because you can at least find what was one silver lining or 2 that happened in my day today. And another one is happy, not perfect. And that's a really important piece to keep in mind. Nothing is always going to be perfect, but we want to make sure that we're able to get through the day and functioning as well as we can. And here are another couple of what we call grounding exercises. And these are things that anyone can do anywhere, in class, at home, on the airplane, in the bathroom, sitting at work, or whatever you need to do. And one of is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 strategy. And so you just think to your head, in your head, 5 things that you can see around you. It might be a smudge of dirt on the window. It might be a pencil sitting on your desk. It's 4 things you can touch. It could be the ground underneath your feet, a pillow. It could be the watch on your wrist. It could be the jacket covering your body. 3 things that you hear could be any sort of external sound. It could be the wind, a ticking of a clock, a passing car, maybe the furnace or the air conditioning humming. 2 things you can smell. It could be soap, hand sanitizer, garbage cans, maybe not always the best one, but sometimes that's one that's available. And 1 thing that you can taste. And it might just be your saliva in your mouth, or that you just ate a mint, or even a piece of gum. Another great grounding exercise that's really easy and can be done anywhere is our categories exercise. So you can go through as many categories as you can possibly think of and think about, what are 3 different kinds of cars? What are 3 different, and you can time yourself and spend a few minutes. You can say, okay, in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to think of as many fruits and vegetables as I can. Because sometimes when we're having a bad day, or we're getting fixated and we can't change our thoughts and we're having a really hard time moving and feel stuck, this is a way to change our mindset and get us focused on something else. And then go ahead, Kenise.
Oh, no, it's okay. I'm just going to say again, we've talked a bit about transitions that happen during this time in terms of promoting, like with high school and college and vocational training, workforce, all of those kinds of things. So lots of different ways that you can support your young person around those. Just in the interest of time, I'll highlight SMART goals, and I think this will be available online so you can come back to take a look at it. But when kids are thinking about next steps and thinking about goals that they have for themselves, it's important that they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And these are just some different ways that you can start to operationalize how someone might achieve a goal. So if it's to get a summer job, if it's to go to college, what are the steps involved? And this SMART acronym can kind of help you and your team sort of figure out what those next steps might look like. So we have lots of resources that are available both in schools and outside of schools, seeking out therapy. Those are all important things. If you're affiliated with a hospital-based craniofacial team, they typically have options for psychologists or social workers that they can connect you with for additional support. We have some books that we'll include here that you'll be able to see later, but I'm skipping ahead because I want to get to our final part of our presentation tonight, which is to introduce two young people, including Haley Dorr, who's going to start off by sharing her story with us tonight, as well as Jackson Jones. I want to go ahead and transition over to them to give them some time to talk about what it's like to actually navigate adolescence for them. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to them.
Hi, my name is Haley Dorr. I'm 15. I'm a freshman in high school, and I was born with a cleft lip and a cleft palate. Now I'm just going to tell you about some of my highs and lows. Okay, so we'll start with a low. So I became aware of my difference in around 5th and 6th grade. And so when entering middle school, I got pretty heavily bullied and I didn't have a lot of friends. And so I kind of isolated myself, which is not good. But then COVID hit, and weirdly, I was really excited because I didn't have to go to school and see all the people that didn't like me. But then we had to go back, but we had to wear masks, but then we didn't, but I kept mine on. So I became like weirdly obsessed with wearing my mask and hiding my face. And so that was a really low point in my life. It took a lot of courage and just a lot of confidence to be able to take it off again. And so I'm going to just move on to a high because that was just a little sad. And then I went into high school. And so for probably the first time, it's still sorry. So probably for the first time in my life, I had this giant support group going into high school, and I made a lot of friends. I got involved with my school's drama department, and that was probably the best decision of my life. I've met so many people, and I've just made so many friends that I think I'll have for life. And it just really helped me be confident in who I am. And so I just have a little bit of advice for all of you guys. So for anyone who deals with anything, or even if you're just a parent, building confidence takes time. And it's okay to take that time to build that confidence because once you have it, you're going to be unstoppable. Also, just a few ways to build confidence is just by going out of your comfort zone. And also, one last thing, just don't be afraid to reach out to anyone about anything. And here's a little bit of my contact information, and then I'll pass it over to Jackson.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for making the long journey from your bed to the desk to the computer to be with us tonight. Thank you, Haley, for that really good introduction. I appreciate it. So my name is Jackson. I am a rising sophomore at Washington and Lee University, which is a little liberal arts college in Central Virginia. And I'm 18 years old, and I was born with a bilateral cleft lip and cleft palate. And so the first picture on the left is, I want to say, only a week or a week and a half after I was born. The middle picture is from my most recent surgery, and the last picture is from a couple weeks ago before I cut my hair when I was looking very snazzy. But a little bit about my cleft journey is that I've had 11 cleft surgeries. My most recent was a cleft rhinoplasty, which is one that adolescents and teenagers, at least in my perception, tend to get the most. And that was because I could no longer breathe through my nose, and my breathing as a whole was operating at a mere 40%. And as someone who is quite fond of athletics, quite fond of being able to go out in nature, you can imagine the toll that takes when you're trying to breathe and you're unable to. And so for so many teenagers wanting to be involved in sports, wanting to be involved in essentially any sort of activity that needs you to exert yourself, you run into a lot of problems, whether it's with the jaw, whether it's with the blood flow, whether it's with breathing. But for so many cleft teenagers, so many people who are growing up with cleft conditions or any craniofacial conditions for that matter, breathing often becomes a really big issue because for so many sports, breathing is a really technical thing. And so, me specifically, there were quite a few highs and lows of my journey. And there's a next, and from, can we go back one slide real quick? Thank you. For me, a lot of the low, especially of my surgeries in recent years, one of the hardest parts was dealing with the pain of the surgery. And so, as I'm sure a lot of people here know about craniofacial patients, is they do go through a lot of surgery. They go through a lot of medical care. So they tend to have higher pain tolerances. But even for someone who doesn't have, even for someone who is fortunate enough to have a higher pain tolerance, going through the pain and the lost sleep, the lost appetite of the surgeries can be a really low moment. And it requires you to take time off from your life, which as a teenager is really difficult because, I mean, your school is your life, your friends are your life, your sports are your life, and having to take that time off can be really hard. And then having to explain to your peers, your friends, why you had to take that time off is also really difficult. Having to explain that because of your condition, because of your difference, you're having to take this step back, it makes you feel different. It kind of makes you feel like this pariah. And I mean, that's a really hard feeling. And so I think it's really important for parents to encourage their children, their teenagers, their cleft patient of any age to develop a support system, whether that's just the parents, whether that's friends, that's teachers. I think that's really important. And I know another low for me, especially as a man, was having to reclaim that lost sense of masculinity. Because as so many people know, being a man is all about competence, it's about strength, it's about being stoic. And when you're born with this sort of condition that requires constant medical care, it requires constant vulnerability, you almost have to reclaim your masculinity. And that was for something that me and many of my other male cleft craniofacial centric friends have dealt with, is having to reclaim that sense of maleness. And so that's something especially I think is a huge difference between female and male patients, is for male patients that social aspect is so much different because men are supposed to be vulnerable. Men aren't supposed to have those weak moments. And so in addition to feeling challenged as a human, you're also feeling challenged as a man. And that was a really low point for me that's required me to continue building up who I am as a person, continuing to build up who I am as a man. And that was something that my parents have been extremely helpful with. And so I think that leads me next into my next slide really well. Reflections and advice. And while I'm only 18, I like to think that young people can give advice to older people the same way older people can give advice to younger people, and it keeps the world spinning that way. And my biggest piece of advice, especially for people who are born different, for people who are parents of people born different, is to really encourage your child, your teenager, to not really take no for an answer. And there's a fantastic quote by a civil rights activist in the 90s, Shirley Chisholm. And she says that if they don't give you a seat at the table, to bring a folding chair. And for so many people who are born different, they aren't given that seat at the table. They aren't given that equal representation. But I think it's so important that if they're not going to give it to us, we have to take it. And so that's something that I think you have to really articulate to teenagers, especially teenagers who are born with types of craniofacial conditions, is that because they're different doesn't mean that they don't deserve a voice, doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be involved, doesn't mean that they don't deserve to feel important. And for so many people, developing that sense of voice is extremely difficult. And that's why it's so awesome that we have parents and adults and caregivers like all the people watching this webinar who are interested in seeing how they can develop that. And so, I mean, truly, my advice is to just be a support for your teenager and to encourage your teenager in whatever it is they want, whether it's theater, whether it's going to the NFL, whether it's volunteering at the local SPCA, whatever your teenager's interested in, to just really cultivate the best person they can be. And find something that you do better than everyone else and just nail that into the ground until you are the top at what you do. And that's my great advice. And for me specifically, that advice took me to run 3 marathons now. And as going from someone who couldn't breathe to someone who's now running marathons, albeit not very well, it's been a personal journey for myself. And I think everyone needs to find that marathon for themselves, whether it's an actual marathon or something more personal. I mean, find that marathon, find that special thing, and really use it as an outlet for all those feelings that teenagers and for cleft patients have. And I mean, that doing that alleviates so much of the stress that I think comes with being a cleft patient. And I have my next slide is just my contact information. And if anyone wants to contact me, I also work with a really cool organization called Operation Smile, which is a charity that goes around the world to give cleft surgeries to people in developing nations. But if you'd like to contact me in any way, ask any questions, connect with me, that's all my contact information. But I really appreciate MyFace for giving both myself and Haley the platform to share our stories. So thank you all so much.
Wow. Thank you, Jackson and Haley. I can't believe you are both the ages that you are. You're both incredible. And thank you, Dr. Coran and Dr. Albert, for this incredible presentation. We're going to go a little bit over because we do have questions. We want to make sure we get to those questions. So if you have a question, please put it into the chat in your live stream for YouTube or Facebook, and make sure those questions are general in nature, and we'll make sure that they're answered in a general nature for everybody to benefit. I'm going to start off with a question from Jose, and this is to either Dr. Coran or Dr. Albert. How much autonomy do you recommend giving teens about their care? For Jose, in his case, I decided I didn't want any more surgeries after hitting age 15.
I think that it's extremely important that parent and child be collaborative when a child reaches adolescence in the surgical decision-making arena, because again, the child's the one at the end of the day going through the surgery and not the parent or the caregiver. And so I think that, again, that discussion needs to be collaborative. I think that also at the same time, the adolescent needs to be given as much information as possible. Where I work at Shriners, we treat patients up till about 20 or 21 years of age. So sometimes I will have a patient who's 16 and maybe rhinoplasty or orthognathic surgery, jaw surgery is recommended, and the teen is really digging their heels. I'm not interested. And so we will go in, active listening is extremely important, trying to understand why the teen is not interested in that surgery, and then providing as much information. So in my case, in our clinical setting, we will explain, this is your decision. This is the time frame in which we can provide surgeries. In other settings, the craniofacial team can only treat the patient until they're 18 years of age. And we want to explain as much as we can that after your 18 years, it's much harder to get some of these surgeries accomplished because of insurance and restrictions around that area. So I think the shorter answer is we never want to force a teen to undergo surgery, but we want to be able to have them provided with as much education as possible.
Great. Thank you so much. Here's another question from Jose, Dr. Coran. I want to ask you, and this speaks to what Jackson was talking about. He says, when I was growing up, boys and girls with facial differences were treated pretty much the same by their therapists and doctors. Is that still the case? If not, how are children supported differently based on their gender, and how has that been helpful for them?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And I think in my experience working on a cleft craniofacial team, we try to really take an individualized approach to care. So focusing in on what the individual's needs are, regardless of whether they identify as male, female, or another gender altogether. I think that there are some sociocultural factors that come into play, which I think Jackson spoke so eloquently about, just in terms of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. I think we oftentimes think that appearance is more of an issue for girls, right? Because of all of the messages about beauty and about makeup and about how can you look your best all the time. But I think it's important to know too that extends to males now as well. There's a lot of pressure to look a certain way, to be a certain way. So I think as cleft and craniofacial care providers, it's important to sort of hone in on what's going on for that individual patient, and how can we best support them. And it's important not to think that, oh, well, it's a boy, we don't have to worry about how he thinks about his appearance. I think that's not a helpful stance to take. Just as the same, kind of flip side, I don't think we should be overly focused for a female patient, because they may not have as many concerns depending on just their own individual sense of identity. So that tailoring, that individualized approach is often how we go about it these days.
Great. Thank you so much. A question for Jackson. You've had a lot of surgeries, and so how do you prepare yourself mentally for an upcoming surgery?
Well, that's a great question. I think it depends on the person, but me especially, I think headspace is a really important thing. And being able to structure your thinking in a positive manner, to realize that you have to trudge through the mud a lot of times to get to the great big wide open. And so I think it's really important that a child, a teenager, whoever's receiving the surgery, sits down with their care team, including their parents, and really outlines a plan for how everything's going to look like, so that there isn't any doubts in the mind, there isn't any questions, so that when you walk in there on the day of the surgery, you're able to know what's going to happen. And I think especially to preparing your home environment to be able to come home and relax. And so I just think really eliminating any doubt to what it's going to look like, eliminating any doubt to what it's going to look like when you come home. I think that's what, at least for me, was what I needed and what I've successfully been able to produce and help myself when preparing for surgery.
That's terrific. Thank you, Jackson. Haley, a question for you. Someone as a child who's experiencing bullying at school, which you've had some challenges with, and it's really wreaking havoc on her self-esteem. What strategies did you use to navigate the bullying that you experienced? And how did you not let it get you down when it happened?
I think when I got made fun of or just bullied at school, I just told myself that there's probably something going on with them, because there's no reason that someone should want to make fun of another human just because they look weird. There's probably something going on in their life. I mean, we're all teenagers and we're all going through emotional messes right now. And so there was probably something going on in his life or her life that was just messing with them.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you so much. So both for Dr. Corinne and Dr. Albert, I'll let one of you answer this. This comes from Sarah. My daughter is having surgery number 11 in August, a second bone graft. The first one didn't work. She's headed into the 8th grade. She's 13. What's the best advice I can give her as a mom?
I think that's a great question, and it's always tricky with going through something like a second bone graft, because the first one didn't take, because oftentimes there's that anxiety of this didn't work the first time, what's going to make this work the second time. And so I think having open and honest discussions about what the risks are, what the benefits are, the internet's great, and we talked all about social media, and it's all wonderful. I like to use it for Amazon and shopping and things like that, because it's not a great place to find your information about your medical care. So one, having your child come up with questions for your surgical team is extremely important, so that they can go in being as prepared as possible. What are the risks and what are the benefits of going through this surgery? If the first one didn't take, and having a plan in place if the second surgery is not the success that everyone's hoping to have. I think also, again, a child who's gone through 11 surgeries, it's not their first one. So There is an expectation of what surgery is like and what that recovery process looks like, but still having a very clear plan in place. This is how we're going to manage pain. This is how we're going to manage distraction activities. These are the movies we're going to watch. These are the flavored milkshakes or smoothies that we're going to make. And so that things are as much of a controlled environment as possible, but really giving that child a space to ask questions and get information with open and honest responses.
Terrific, terrific. Dr. Corinne, anything you want to add to that?
I think that's great. I think I always look for opportunities to enhance choice and control. So anything that they can do from can they bring their favorite pajamas to the hospital? Can they bring their, can they have a plan of movies that they're going to get caught up on or shows they're going to binge while they're recovering? Any of those kinds of things. Then another colleague of mine likes to focus on what you can do as much as what you can't do after surgery. Often there's a list of things, well, you can't do this, you can't eat this, you can't do that. But sort of thinking about, okay, what can I still do and how can I plug more of that into my daily life?
Terrific. Well, I have to say a huge thank you to Dr. Albert, Dr. Corinne, Jackson, Haley. You all are just incredible. I know that people probably have more questions, and you're more than welcome to reach out to us at info@myface and ask info@myface.org, and ask those questions. And I'll remind everybody, we will archive this program on our website and all of the resources. We went through a lot of information, we want to make sure you all have access to, so you'll be able to download the slides and see all of this at the myface.org website. Craniofacial differences impact the body and spirit so significantly, and MyFace provides important direct services such as access to a variety of patient and family support groups, which take place virtually, podcasts, and workshops. These programs offer guidance, resources, and a supportive environment for all who participate. MyFace also hosts live events that seek to bring our community together to empower the spirit and build strength, and let families across the country know that they are not alone. For more information about the programs and services we offer, please visit us at myface.org. I'd like to draw your attention to one of our programs in particular, which is our adolescent support group. MyFace offers a series of online support groups for the craniofacial community, including a support group for adolescents ages 14 to 18. The Adolescent Support Group meets once a month, and this is led by Dr. Eric Rickland, a clinical psychologist who was also born with the craniofacial condition Cruzon syndrome. For more information about the Adolescent Support Group, please visit our website at myface.org, online groups, or contact Dina Zuckerberg at dina@myface.org. A new episode of My Face, My Story podcast debuted today, Wednesday, June 15th, on all podcast platforms plus YouTube. This month's episode was a conversation with Morgan McGann, Sarah Pollock, and Emily Krebs, three best friends born with Apert syndromes. You can take a look at that at myface.org/mystory. And join us on Saturday, September 23rd for Races for Faces. This is a 5K walk with musical performances, carnival games, a raffle, and prizes. Located at Pier 62 at Hudson River Park in New York City. Please visit racesforfaces.org for further information. And you don't have to be in New York to participate. You can participate virtually. So please visit racesforfaces.org, and we hope to see you then. Coming in the fall of 2023, we will have our next installment of our Transforming Lives webinar series with a program called Orthodontic Management of Cleft Lip and Palate, featuring Dr. Pradeep R. Chettier, the Associate Professor of Plastic Surgery Orthodontics at NYU Langone Health and Associate Professor of Orthodontics at NYU College of Dentistry, as well as Travis Gibson, the craniofacial orthodontist at BC Children's Hospital in Vancouver, Canada. Further information will be available on the MyFace website soon. At MyFace, we strive to provide the most helpful and informative resources To help us do so, we ask that you take a few moments to complete our brief survey by visiting myface.org/adolescent survey, or you can take a picture of this QR code that's on the screen right now, and that will take you directly to the survey. This really helps us understand what other topics we can provide to help you in your craniofacial journey. We'll also provide this information to the survey. It came to you in the reminder that we sent to you earlier today, and you will receive an email after this program with a link to the survey as well. I want to thank you all for sharing your time with us today and wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.